Welcome, guys. Welcome back to Minko's Corner once again. Today we're back with another historical video. Today we're watching Rise of Evil, Adolf Hitler, the Nazi Party. This is a channel of Sabaton history. It's a very good channel. I've been watching their videos, and it's very well researched and very well presented. And I want we just did World War One. If you haven't watched them, go watch my videos on the First World War. Today we're going to World War Two. I'm doing a very sporadic video. This isn't part of a series. Well, it is. I think it's the 20th video in the series. I don't know how this works, but basically, I think it's a standalone video. Anyways, we're going off track. If you like my video reaction, like, subscribe, and let's go in.
And I'm Joachim from Sabaton.
And this is Sabaton History. Adolf Hitler's rise to power was as unlikely as his rule was catastrophic.
And our song Rise of Evil is quite unusual in the sense that it doesn't cover an armed conflict.
And he's going to tell you about the song, but first, I'm going to tell you the history. Now we're just getting started. We have the power, and we're not going to give it up again. With these prescient words, Adolf Hitler greeted his party members on February 5th, 1933, a few days after he was officially declared the new Chancellor of Germany. The National Socialists, his party, known also as the NSDAP, or the Nazi Party, is now the biggest party in the Reichstag, the parliament, with 33% of the seats. Now, the Communist Party has 16.9%.
Yeah.
That means that the conservative center-right and liberal center-left parties, opposed to both the communists and the Nazis, as well as each other, don't have the majority needed to form a government. Instead, under leadership of a conservative and Catholic bloc, many of the mainstream MPs plan to simply control the ambitious Hitler when he is chancellor. But Hitler was determined. His goal was to get nothing less than absolute power. He would destroy the parliamentary system, which he very much despised, and establish his Führerdiktatur by any and all means necessary. But to rise above the others, Hitler had to win over the general public, large private interests, and the powerful elements of the government and the military first. His first speech as the Chancellor of the Reich was a roundup of the topics he had unceasingly spoken about since the beginning of his political career in the pubs of Munich after the First World War. But Hitler had perfected the art of public speaking, and he really knew how to work a crowd and how to paint pictures in the minds of his listeners. He spoke of the years of Marxist influence that had ruined the German economy, how the Treaty of Versailles, dictated by the malevolent victors of the war, had left the once glorious German Empire fragmented and its people impoverished. And as the listeners grew emotional, Hitler promised that he would destroy Marxism with fire and sword and free Germany from the poisonous class struggle. Under his leadership, German society would find its way back to conservative Christian values and find renewed pride in its past.
Oh, that's a lie. I'm pretty sure he went after the Christians right away when he took power. I think it's in a few years. He went after them right away. What the fuck are you talking about?
Earned non-Nazi tacit acceptance of Hitler into actual sympathy, especially from the right end of the political spectrum. However, while Hitler spoke of peace and prosperity to the public, he shifted to a bellicose, threatening, and more sinister tone in more private conversations. Just a few days after becoming chancellor, he met with the highest generals of the Reichswehr, Germany's handicapped army. Germany's future, Hitler insisted, is depending on the Wehrmacht and the Wehrmacht alone. Pacifism was unworthy of Germany's heritage, and according to Hitler's social Darwinistic views, Germany had to fight its way back to great power status. Getting back lost colonies was one idea, but conquering Lebensraum in Europe's east and pursuing a ruthless Germanization was preferable to Hitler and the Nazis. Either way, to be in a position to make demands of the world, Germany's military had to undergo a massive buildup, despite the limitations imposed by the Versailles Treaty. This was exactly what those generals most wanted to hear. A strong military would...
Hitler in the beginning, I've read this book, well, I'm in the middle of it, called The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. And he made a lot of decisions that he lucked out on. pure luck in terms of it was very bold decisions, but like logically speaking, it was idiotic or extremely risky because when he occupied the Rhineland, which was a part of basically imagine the Maginot Line and a little bit of the territory beyond that in Germany. Uh, he couldn't station troops there. It was illegal, and it would potentially give a reason to the French to go to war with Germany because that was he couldn't do it. He couldn't put troops in the Rhineland, but he did it. He put troops in the Rhineland. He annexed Austria, and the powers that be didn't do anything. They put their head in the sand and they just hoped. They hoped. The Sudetenland, the annexation of Czechoslovakia. It's
Would consequently elevate their own positions in German society.
A nation in despair, weakened by war defeated, lost of pride in the sight. A former prisoner with a vision or delusion, rise to power in the Reich.
As the next step, Hitler met with another powerful group, the industrials. Many shareholders of the big companies, such as IG Farben or Krupp, were initially distrustful of Hitler and his party, especially the word socialist in National Socialist Party. That had a lot of them worried that radical economic changes that would negatively affect them were on the horizon. Today, in 2019, there is still a debate among historians as to how socialists, the National Socialists, actually were. In terms of social policy, they were on the extreme reactionary right. Opinions vary as to their economic policy, and they likely always will. But one thing was pretty certain about the party back then. The NSDAP was broke. Election campaigns are expensive, and the lavish style of the Nazis with all the uniforms, banners, and parades was a real drain on funds. Hitler convinced the industrials, though, that socialist was a rather flexible term and that their powerful position would go untouched under his rule. Instead, there would be a lot of new contracts for them from the armament industry. Again, Hitler's speaking skills transformed suspicious listeners to excited followers. And by the end of the meeting, the NSDAP coffers were filled with 3 million Reichsmarks. You gotta spend money to make money, right? Now, with the support of both the military and industry, Hitler turned to his internal enemies. He made fellow Nazi Hermann Goering, famous World War I fighter pilot, and in 1933 president of the Reichstag and minister without portfolio, Reichskommissar of the Prussian Department of the Interior and minister-president of Prussia, which meant nothing less than that Goering now commanded both the police and the administration of the Prussian state. And he immediately purged both institutions of enemies of the Nazis and formed the Gestapo, the secret police. The Nazi paramilitary organizations SS, SA, and Stahlhelm now ran rampant, targeting their enemies and settling scores both old and new. Their victims were mostly communists and social democrats at this point. But other critics of the Nazis fell prey to the violent mob or to corrupt police officers. They busted up election meetings. They jumped and arrested people on the streets or dragged them out of their homes at night.
Is that
In
Karl
the
Marx?
brown barracks, the enemies of the Nazis were brutally beaten, tortured, and often outright killed without consequence for the
Jesus
murderers.
Christ.
It was a brutal terror that swept the Prussian state, but was in fact only an omen of what was to come for the rest of the country once the Nazis got control of the entire government system. Officially, this was explained by Hitler as preventing the imminent communist revolution. That actually was believed by large parts of the public because the danger of the communist threat, the Red Scare, had been hyped by politicians across the spectrum since World War I. The Reichstag fire, the burning of the German parliament building on February 27th, was just another catalyst to further escalate the violence. To this day, there are those who believe that the Nazis were actually
Yeah.
behind the attack.
They're pretty sure that the Nazis burned the Reichstag to the ground because it gave basically Hitler used the momentum that he gained by using the fear of the people to basically become dictator of Germany. He was allowed to gain all these powers by the government to basically solve the crisis, But
Back on
he
the
just never
Reichstag,
gave them
although
back.
there is no direct evidence of this. And in his diaries, Joseph Goebbels, Nazi propagandist, and in February 1933, soon-to-be Minister of Propaganda, gives no hints about it. But the lone Dutch communist...
By the way, I've never really understood why he was named Minister of Propaganda. Because it's like saying, oh yeah, this guy, he's gonna lie to the whole nation. He's gonna... Why don't you name him something more, vague? Minister of News, Minister of Information. Why propaganda? It sounds horrible right away. The title?
Captured at the scene, gave Hitler the chance to push the first of many emergency laws through Parliament. As a response to the attack, the basic rights of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of the press were immediately suspended, as was the power of the individual German states.
Rebuilding an army, make the nation proud, disregarding the treaty, secret plans for Lebensraum, stop the Holocaust, the Reich will rise.
The terror now swept nationwide as the Gleichschaltung, the co-option of the interior ministries under Nazi rule, took effect under these emergency laws. Bit by bit, the positions in the governments of German cities and states were taken over by Nazi Party members. All police and security forces were by mid-1934 under direct control of the SS, Schutzstaffel, and its leader, Heinrich Himmler. Himmler appoints Theodor Eicke to head up the Dachau camp, and Eicke proceeds to formalize what had been a spontaneously created concentration camp system. An atmosphere of violence and fear gripped every German city in those days, and everyone knew that people could simply disappear and find themselves in the laboratory of violence.
I wonder if that's how the Chinese feel right now, because you see, I don't know if you guys heard that there was this tennis player who accused a vice premier of the Chinese Communist Party that she was raped by him, and she disappeared. Social media, she was gone. Nobody knows where she is. And I wonder first of all where that shit is going. If if we're going towards something similar to the 1930s, 1940s of the Second World War. But also, I wonder if that's how they felt, the Germans at the time.
Violence. That's what the German historian Volker Ulrich called Dachau in those days. Among those people who disappeared were Jews, the main villains in Hitler's worldview. Now, the takeover by Hitler triggered some rather negative reactions abroad. So the Nazis claim, with no evidence, that this is because Jews are spreading false stories of atrocities committed in Germany. In retaliation for the fictional crimes, on April 1st, 1933, the Nazis called for a nationwide boycott of Jewish stores, doctors, and lawyers. Although the boycott gains little traction and only really lasts for a day, Jews were now the official enemy of the state, and the legal discrimination against Jews was soon followed by physical violence. This was very unpopular with large parts of the general public, but there was no substantial resistance among the people either. Just apathy.
I think in today's day and age, I'm sorry I'm pausing, but I think it's the same thing is happening throughout social media, where people are afraid of voicing their thoughts for fear of being, canceled or ostracized. If their thoughts are in any way, shape, or form, I don't know, other than what the mainstream believes. So it's, the world, history goes on, and it's just,
Terror had already done its work, and the people were terrified. And the violence and discrimination against the Jews would only increase year by year until the pogroms of Kristallnacht of 1938, when Jews were killed or sent to camps by the thousands, their synagogues burned, their homes, prayer rooms, and graveyards destroyed. Beginning November 1938, they are incarcerated simply for being Jews. Back again in 1933, on May 1st, the National Socialist Party celebrated the Tag der Arbeit, Labor Day, as an official holiday with huge parades and tens of thousands of workers listening to Hitler's speeches on the radio.
I wonder if I'm sorry, I'm pausing, guys. I wonder if Hitler did have this vindictiveness against Jews, would he have been able to seize power? Number one, and number two, what difference would it have made in terms of the war machine? Because they sacrificed so many resources for doing something so asinine and so idiotic that if they didn't sacrifice those resources when they went to war with Russia, I wonder if history would have went a complete different way if all the resources were concentrated on the Eastern Front instead of being
Hitler
wasted.
had promised to reduce the high unemployment rate by gigantic construction projects like the Autobahn. Fairly short-term solution, sure, but the idea worked, and the traditional left-leaning workers put their trust in Hitler. The next day, the last real threat to Nazi rule that could have united large parts of society, the unions, accepted their dissolution without a fight. Instead, the NSDAP had gained over 2 million members in just those 3 months of 1933 alone, and the Nazis had successfully destroyed any opposition to their rule. Everyone who thought Hitler controllable, everyone who thought the Nazis would never gain real power, and everyone who had hesitated to organize a coordinated resistance to the violence was now rendered powerless. The Nazis had taken control over every vital institution in Germany, and they were not about to give up that power. The swastika flew next to the national colors and would soon replace them as the flag of the German Reich. From the very beginning, Hitler had not only been determined to obtain absolute power, but he had also been completely open about his plans. His ambitions declared in his book Mein Kampf were by no means a secret, but nearly everybody had underestimated the ruthlessness of the former corporal from Austria. One party, one belief, one conviction, as Goebbels dictated. All other parties must be eradicated, and only the Nazi Party shall remain. With Germany under his control, Hitler moved on to the next phase of his grand vision. His gaze wandered outwards, across the borders drawn in 1919.
Yeah.
The Fuhrer looked towards Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and Lithuania, to the countries that he saw as bearing the stigma of the Versailles Treaty, nations where a large ethnic German population lived under what Hitler considered foreign rule. Reversing or breaking that treaty was the next step in Hitler's plans, but that would take time to prepare. And until then, Hitler had to rely on bait-and-switch tactics. Dishonesty was his weapon of choice, to test the weakness and the gullibility of the other European powers. While the Wehrmacht was preparing and rebuilding under the swastika, the Führer's plans for the expansion of the Third Reich were set in motion. Hitler was growing ready to wager Germany's future in an all-or-nothing gamble. There would be no 1918 ever again. Germany would return to glory, or it would perish.
No man, no land.
Rise of Evil, just by the nature of its subject matter, it's got to be a little bit controversial, right? I mean, has that ever come to haunt you?
Yeah, not really haunt us, but it is a controversial subject. It's about how Adolf Hitler came to power. And let's just say the promoters in especially Germany weren't really looking forward to us performing that song live. However, I mean, as soon as we explained to them that, we are a band that sings about military history, controversial subjects will arise from time to time. However, we don't ever do any kind of political or religious propaganda. And this song is simply about how Adolf Hitler came to power.
Well, it's not pro-Nazi, it's telling a story.
Absolutely. And we can't really tell a story about World War II without somehow including Adolf Hitler or the Nazis.
Yeah, you probably have to mention them once in a while.
Yeah, you have to mention the war.
Now, But you have a lot of fans all over the world, and they're going to be of all different nations and all different backgrounds and all different political figures. You must have extremists from all kinds of stripes, including you must have some fans around there that are pro-Nazi. That's going to happen just by the number of fans you have.
Yeah, I mean, we've been accused of being almost everything because we cover so many subjects for so many different points of view. Actually, I'm sorry to say this, but I don't actually give a shit what people who listen to us think.
Right.
I don't give a shit about the religion, the color of their skin, or anything. Everything is fine. But please, you know, consider it like genitals. It's okay to have, but don't whip them out in public.
Okay.
So
you hear that, Tommy?
So it's like all we care about is we don't want our music in any way used for political or religious reasons. We don't want to compromise on our neutrality. We want to be able to tell stories from all kinds of views, not by judging what's wrong or right, but simply because we find that way of telling the story the most interesting one. But we do know we're walking into minefields sometimes.
Sure.
That's a good example also with doing the whole Carolus Rex album, doing it in Swedish as well, because in many ways that is considered extreme right-wing in Sweden. We've been called communists as well because
Wait,
of...
what? Carlos Rex is extreme right in Sweden? Why? Because he was a conqueror? Dude, Sweden's a pussy, man.
Doing the Songatero Dominatus about the final battle of Berlin.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you can keep accusing us of our political views, but the simple fact is we don't really have any message with our music other than to tell these stories.
I think that was very well said. Well, that is it for today for Sabaton History.
That was very good. I really enjoyed the video. I hope you guys did as well. I hope you liked my reaction. I didn't know that in Sweden, Carlos Rex, Charles the 13th, I think, 12th, he was basically a conqueror. I watched the series on him. He at the time, Sweden was a very, very powerful nation, and he went to war with a bunch of nations, Poland, Lithuania, Russia. I mean, he was a badass, and I didn't know that talking about him in Sweden was considered somehow a right-wing talking point. I don't know what's going on in Sweden. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed my reaction. If you did, leave a like. It's really appreciated, and I'll see you guys next time. See you.